Hello, it's Scott Manley with the other side of my review of the decade. So I did start out playing video games, and that's sort of what got me known. So I think it was kind of important for me to cover the video games that I actually really have a lot of respect for. And I tried to come up with 10 and failed. I came up with like 10 regular games and then a whole bunch of other spaceship games. So let's just go over these lists. So, regular video games. I think Undertale was one of my absolute favorites. It was like beginning to end, unalloyed, indie joy. On the flip side, The Last of Us is a big budget console title, which was also perfect from start to end. And yeah, movie licenses, not many good movie licenses, but Alien Isolation, boy, did that capture the spirit of the movie in every way. The sound design on that is great. For games that put you in the places, I think Papers, Please has, I don't know, like there's something about the way its storytelling works where you're basically a guard on a border in some unnamed Eastern European country. Love that. Lucas Pope is amazing, which is why also I had to put The Return of Obra Dinn on there. A game where you are solving deaths, murders, using a watch that reverts time, but it also has a graphical system based on 1 bit per pixel. The guy had to solve all sorts of technical problems that nobody actually needed solving. He just did it because the art demanded it. So respect to Lucas Pope for being my favourite game developer of the decade. Let me see, the XCOM games, and I can't really pick between XCOM or XCOM 2 because they were both really worthy remakes of the greatest game of the 90s as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, either of those is great. If you've got mobile, you should absolutely have XCOM, Enemy Within on it because it will make good use of your storage and time and everything. Minecraft. Oh boy, yeah, Minecraft was a game that I loved even before it was famous. And yes, it was released in 2009. So yeah, it didn't actually start selling until 2010. So I'm going to say that's in this decade. And I think that it's been great that it's actually produced a lot of, made a lot of kids think about things and explore and build. It's been a great game for that. And by the same token, the guy that originally created Infiniminer, he went on to create Space Chem and Shenzhen.io. Shenzhen.io by Zachtronics is a game which simultaneously has amazing puzzles that push you to find new and better ways of solving them, but also it has a dark sense of humor in the story that's told via email. And it's kind of forced me or made me want to go out and learn how to program like Arduino and stuff like this. I've got my notes down here because I just want to make sure I remember all my games. Yeah, so what else? Games that actually taught me things. Crusader Kings 2 taught me more about medieval inheritance law than I have ever thought I would ever need to know. Crusader Kings 2 is probably one of my favorite games in terms of emergent gameplay with all the interlinked stories and everything. And I actually have the best story. Just to give you an idea, if you've never played Crusader Kings 2, you are the ruler of a kingdom or whatever, or maybe a barony or whatever, but you are trying to work your way up the ladder, perhaps, do whatever you want. You might want to reunify the Holy Roman Empire or stuff. But in one particular playthrough, I married I murdered the king. No, I murdered the husband of a lady who had a claim on the kingdom of Mercia, then married her, then supported her so that she got back her rulership of Mercia. And to make sure the inheritance worked, I then assassinated her male children, leaving a female child who I then married to my son, ensuring that the inheritance, would pass on through them. However, I then realized that my son was probably gay because he wasn't producing a child with this all-important heir. Therefore, I chose seduction as my focus and seduced my daughter-in-law to create an heir for my country, and therefore unified the British Isles. Isn't that a story? Boy. Great stories that were less free form. Fallout New Vegas, easily the best Fallout game. Totally worth it. So that's my 10. I think, yeah, it was totally 10 games which I think defined the 2010s for me. For spaceship games, of course. You'll notice I never said Kerbal Space Program, because that is not just the best game of the decade. It's probably the best game ever on account of the fact that it has literally taught me things, as in, I thought that you needed to have computers to fly rockets in space. Turns out you can do all the math on your own. You can fly by the seat of the pants and you can land on the moon if you judge it correctly. It's marvelous. But I just think it's great that it has taught real people real science, and some of them have gone and used that and gone on into a career in aerospace, so that's great. FTL, again in the emergent storytelling world, FTL has so many threads and stories that have come through it. I think it's one of my favorites. Elite Dangerous. Okay, so Elite Dangerous is a game which gives you this perfect experience of sitting inside a spaceship. However, the gameplay by and by is way more grindy than it should be. That being said, when the first time you launch, the first time you land, there's so many just awesome cinematic moments. When you jump into a star and it fills the screen, it is the definitive spaceship flying game right now. But as I said, it's very freeform, very, very grindy. If you just want to jump in and blow stuff up and have capital ships coming in and have missiles flying everywhere, Strike Suit Zero, which not only puts you in the seat of a starship pilot shooting stuff and blowing stuff up with missions where you're fighting the colonists against an evil super weapon, whatever, you also get to fly as a transforming robot that can really cause havoc in space. Fascinating. It's fantastic. It's totally arcadey, but I love that game. I love it to death. And the other game, I think, in my sort of spaceship games is Outer Wilds. Outer Wilds was a game I played when it was a student project, and it was really great then. When it got made into a full game, it became probably the game of the year for me as far as I'm concerned. It was released this year, and so much joy to be had. I wish I could forget everything and play it again. Same as with the Return of the Obra Dinn. Honourable mentions for spaceship games this decade has to go to EVE Online, because technically it was released in 2004, but it has had more of its life and development in the 2010s. House of the Dying Sun is the other option if you want to just jump in and blow stuff up. It has great sound design, really cool aesthetics, and a vicious streak in some of the mission designs. Star Citizen, obviously, you can't ignore for the fact that it is big, huge, ambitious, and has hundreds of millions of dollars of fan money behind it. Hope it works at some point. Children of a Dead Earth, also ambitious in a different way. It tried to model physics in every single detail. It wasn't the best game, but it was a fascinating physics sandbox to put things together, to build like a gun that shoots shells that have nuclear warheads in them. Great. And No Man's Sky. No Man's Sky came out and it was a mess, a vacuous, expanse of nothingness. Missing features, missing promised features, and then over multiple updates it has expanded and it has become an absolutely wonderful game to spend time in. You may not ever complete it, but you can just dip in and out of that and enjoy it every step of the way. So those are my honourable mentions, I guess. And hey, you know what? I also watched movies this decade. So I'm just going to give you a list of what I love in terms of movies this decade. Favorite movie of the decade? Mad Max Fury Road. I'm going to say I was skeptical when George Miller came and he said he was going to go and make another Mad Max. I was like, didn't you just make Happy Feet? But he came back, and not only is Mad Max probably the best action movie of the decade, not only did it rekindle physical, practical special effects, it also is quite possibly the best Mad Max movie ever. And here's the thing, Mad Max isn't even the main character in that movie. It's, of course, Furiosa, who is just, iconic. What a fantastic movie. I'm so glad that came out so well. I was worried, but I was so glad that they did that so well. Best pure science fiction movie of the decade has to be Arrival, directed by Denis Villeneuve. It has just a great story, great twist, great aesthetics to it. And also, honorable mentions, Blade Runner 29 by the same director. Every single scene in that, the cinematography is just, oh, it is perfect. But Blade Runner 2049, clearly not as good as the original Blade Runner on many levels. But yeah, definitely worth just putting on, even if you don't watch the story, just looking at how they framed every shot in that movie. Yeah. Also, another great sci-fi movie, The Martian. Now, The Martian is probably the movie that had me coming away with the biggest smile. And yeah, it was a movie where there was really no antagonist. It was one person just trying to survive, and the human race all getting in behind to help him ultimately. It had funny lines, it had disco music, it had sciencing the shit out of things. Oh, and yeah, the best thing is after they get home, there's this sort of scene right at the very end, and you've got the world coming together on the next mission, getting on the love train, join hands. Oh, yeah, that's the space travel future that I want, right? Obviously I'm a bit of a Trekkie in that way. Let me see. So the flip side of this, of course, is Under the Skin, which I loved, and it is dark and disturbed and warped and visually fascinating as well. Scarlett Johansson as an alien, sort of wandering around Scotland, meeting men and taking all their inner life energy, and it's really weird and awesome and special. It was the 2010s was also when Star Wars became part of Disney, and Disney started making Star Wars movies, and frankly the new trilogy was kind of weak. I didn't like any of the J.J. Abrams movies. I liked The Last Jedi a lot more for various reasons. I understand a lot of people disagree, and we will agree to disagree on that. But Rogue One was absolutely the best Star Wars movie of the decade. I didn't like it at first, but the more I've watched it, the better it gets. Having said that, of course, The Mandalorian is probably the best Star Wars thing of the decade, just down to the fact that they've got in all these guest stars doing weird things, guest directors, and they've not been afraid to mix it up, have fun, and just to expand the Star Wars lore in a way that's fun. Okay, so next couple of movies, Mexican directors. So Guillermo del Toro is one of my favorite. He's been making movies about monsters and people for a very long time. Shape of Water, finally he gets the respect that he deserves. So love that movie. Again, it's just humans and monsters interacting in the way that they only can in a Guillermo del Toro movie. But honorable mention to Pacific Rim, which also has monsters and giant robots. It was not a perfect movie, but you know what? The theme tune is probably the best theme tune from the entire decade. I love that. I put that on and it gives you a huge burst of energy. The other Mexican director is Alfonso Cuarón, who of course did Gravity, which I wanted to love way more than it deserved. Gravity looks amazing, and it has a lot of really good ideas in it. And I just wish they'd asked me. I would have fixed a couple of scenes and we would have still had the good set pieces and everything. But I do think, however, his movie Roma is much more down to earth. And also every single shot in that movie is also perfect. It looks great. It has, these weird, dilemmas. And, oh, yeah. It's one of those movies I was so glad that I got to see on the big screen instead of just the Netflix version. I forgot to mention also, it was the same decade that Disney came in and the MCU ruled everything. It ruled the box office. And yeah, there are a lot of superhero movies, but I think if I was to pick one, I would have to say Thor Ragnarok, because it was just fun. The Thor movies had been terrible, frankly. They'd been far too serious. They'd been trying to explain magic away by science. And then Taika Waititi comes in and he not only puts in Thor, but also puts in the Hulk. And the Hulk hadn't even got a trilogy because, the reaction to the Incredible Hulk had been terrible. Puts those two second string Avengers together and makes probably the best, the funniest, the most colourful movies in the MCU, and I am mad respect for that. It's joy from end to end. However, also got to say, honorable mention to Black Panther because I love Afrofuturism and I live in Oakland, and so we got to see just that movie just playing for months and months. I loved the early weekends where people were lining up around the block and dressing up in their best, gear. Like they would take, I don't know, it was just they were dressing up like the characters, dressing up what they think, they should look like, and it was just a wonderful experience. Also, again, so one more entry from Oakland. Boots Riley created Sorry to Bother You, which is a movie that goes all over the place and ultimately is a sci-fi movie, but you don't realize it until right halfway through, and it has it's an amazing, weird, fun, different movie. So it's one of my favorites of the decade for sure. Finally, after all the interruptions, I'm going to round my list out by Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which is not just animation and superheroes, it's multiple kinds of animation. It's just hella fun from start to end. I've never thought that Spider-Man's a great superhero, but damn it, if this is not the best movie of the superhero movie of the decade. Yeah. So yeah, that's my list of stuff for those that care. Thank you all for watching. Love you guys. I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.